The beginning of betrayal and the seeds of revenge. Liam Carter stood in the grand hall of his sprawling estate, the golden light from the chandeliers reflecting off polished marble floors. The air buzzed with the usual chatter of high society, glasses clinking, laughter ringing in the background. To the guests, it was just another extravagant party thrown by one of the wealthiest men in the city, a celebration of success, power, and influence. But Liam was not celebrating. His gaze flickered toward the upper balcony, his heart hammering in his chest. A laugh, light, intimate, echoed from his private study. A laugh he knew all too well. Charlotte, his fiancée. Liam had been searching for her for the last half hour. She was supposed to be by his side, charming the guests as she always did. Instead, she was here, behind closed doors. A murmur of voices carried down the hall, too soft to discern the words, but intimate enough to raise his suspicions. His steps slowed, his body tense. The door was ajar, just enough for him to see inside. What he saw froze him in place. Charlotte stood close to another man, her golden hair cascading over her bare shoulders, her silk dress slipping slightly as she leaned forward toward Henry, Liam's best friend, his business partner. They were entwined on the leather couch, his couch, caught mid-laugh, as though the world outside didn't exist. The sight was surreal, almost absurd. Charlotte's blue eyes widened as she noticed him standing there. For a brief moment, guilt flickered across her face before she scrambled to her feet, clutching at her dress. Henry, however, was slower, his hand smoothing over his shirt, his expression one of false calm. "It's not what it looks like," Henry said, his voice measured, as if he could still salvage the situation. Liam's gaze flicked between them, his jaw tightening. His mind reeled, caught between the shocking betrayal and the cold rage settling in his chest. "I trusted you," Liam said, his voice barely above a whisper. The weight of his words was heavier than the silence in the room. His eyes locked onto Henry's, daring him to speak. Charlotte stepped forward, her hand reaching out, her lips parting as if to explain. "Liam, please, don't." His voice was sharp enough to cut steel. With that, he turned on his heel and walked away. The grandeur of the Carter estate was suffocating as he descended the grand staircase. The golden chandeliers continued to glow, the guests continued their meaningless conversations, and the illusion of success and stability remained intact. But Liam felt nothing but disgust. He moved through the crowd with practiced ease, his mask of composure never slipping. He smiled at the right moments, exchanged pleasantries, and laughed when expected. Not a single person suspected the turmoil raging beneath his controlled exterior. When the last of the guests had finally departed, and the house fell into silence, Liam retreated to his room. He stood by the window, staring out at the city skyline. His reflection in the glass was a stark reminder of who he was, or rather, who he had allowed himself to become. Charlotte's laughter replayed in his mind like a broken record, each echo sharper than the last. Henry's smug indifference stoked the embers of his rage. His closest confidant had betrayed him. The woman he had planned to marry had shattered the trust he had so foolishly placed in her, and he had been too blind to see it. The need for vengeance burned within him, but he refused to lash out recklessly. No, his revenge would be slow, calculated. Charlotte and Henry had thought they could make a fool of him. They were wrong. Liam grabbed his coat and left the estate, the cold night air biting at his skin. His feet carried him aimlessly through the bustling streets. The lively hum of the city was a sharp contrast to the storm brewing inside him. He kept walking, leaving behind the glittering lights, the towering buildings, and the world that had betrayed him. The streets became quieter, the air heavier, the shadows stretching longer. And that's when he saw her. A woman wrapped in layers of tattered clothing sat hunched over on a dimly lit park bench. Her sharp eyes watched him from beneath messy strands of hair. Despite the grime that clung to her skin, there was something defiant about her posture, something that made him pause. She met his gaze without flinching. "Staring doesn't feed the hungry," she said, her voice steady, edged with sarcasm. Liam was caught off guard. For a moment, he simply stared, trying to make sense of her presence. She didn't look away. Her gaze held an intensity that felt almost confrontational. "What's your story?" he asked, his voice low. The woman smirked bitterly, shaking her head. "You wouldn't care even if I told you." But he did care. More than he wanted to admit. There was something in her defiance, in her resilience, that mirrored the fire now burning inside him. "You're wrong," he said finally. "I care more than you think." For the first time, the woman's expression softened, her sharp eyes narrowing, as though trying to read him. Liam didn't know exactly why he lingered. But one thing became clear: this woman was going to be part of his plan. And his plan was to make Charlotte and Henry regret their betrayal in a way they would never forget. A proposal of shadows and secrets. The night air was thick with the scent of rain, the streets shimmering under the glow of distant streetlights. Liam stood before the homeless woman, his sharp blue eyes unwavering as he studied her. Her posture was rigid, her fingers curled around the edges of her tattered coat as though bracing against the cold. And against him. Eva Mitchell. He didn't know her name yet, but something about her intrigued him. She was not the kind of person who cowered, not even when faced with the unknown. There was a fire in her gaze, a defiance that reminded him of something buried deep within himself. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice steady despite the exhaustion etched into her face. Liam took a slow step closer, careful not to startle her. "A deal." She let out a bitter laugh, shaking her head. "I don't make deals with men in expensive suits. You haven't heard what I have to offer." Ava's brows furrowed, but she didn't look away. "All right, rich boy, entertain me." Liam inhaled, choosing his next words carefully. He was about to cross a line he had never dared to before. "Marry me." Ava's expression flickered between disbelief and amusement. Then she laughed. A short, sharp sound. "That's a joke, right? You want to marry someone like me?" His voice was calm, precise. "Yes." Ava stopped laughing. "Why?" "Because I need someone no one would expect. Someone who will turn the world on its head." He hesitated, searching for the right way to explain. "I want revenge." Ava's lips parted slightly, as if trying to process the absurdity of the situation. "Revenge? And you think a marriage to a homeless woman is going to help you with that?" Liam's jaw tightened. "My fiancée betrayed me with my best friend. The two people I trusted most in this world stabbed me in the back." His voice was steady, but there was a storm beneath it. "They think they've humiliated me, that they've won. But I want to show them how wrong they are." Ava crossed her arms. "And where do I fit into this little soap opera of yours?" Liam's lips curled into the faintest smirk. "You're the unexpected factor. The scandal. The wild card no one saw coming. Imagine their shock when I replaced Charlotte with someone they'd never even let into their perfect world. The humiliation will be theirs, not mine." Ava tilted her head. "So, what's in it for me?" Liam didn't hesitate. "A home. Stability. Money. A chance to start over. You'd have everything you need to rebuild your life." Ava scoffed, shaking her head. "And all I have to do is play the part of your wife." "Yes." She studied him carefully, searching for deception. "And after? When you've had your revenge?" Liam's expression darkened slightly. "We part ways. You'll leave with more money than you ever thought possible. A fresh start. Far from this life." Ava fell silent, her mind racing. Liam Carter was offering her something she had stopped believing in a long time ago. Security. She had spent too many nights in the cold, too many days fighting to survive in a world that had already abandoned her. But could she trust him? She had met men like him before. Powerful, controlled, dangerous in ways they didn't even need to explain. But there was something different about Liam. He wasn't just another ruthless businessman. He was a man on the edge, a man who had been betrayed in a way that had shattered something inside him. And in his brokenness, she saw something familiar. "I'll do it," she said finally. "But I have conditions." Liam's smirk returned. "I expected nothing less." She straightened her shoulders, her voice firm. 1. I'm not your puppet. I'm not going to be some brainless trophy wife who follows orders. Agreed. 2. I get to walk away when this is over. No strings, no obligations. Done. And 3. If I ever feel unsafe, I leave. No questions asked. Liam nodded, his expression unreadable. Fair. Ava exhaled, her body still tense. Fine, then, you've got yourself a wife. The Wedding of Shadows. 2 days later, Ava Mitchell stood before a judge in a courthouse, her reflection staring back at her from the polished marble walls. Gone were the layers of dirt and the tattered clothing. In their place was a simple but elegant white dress, its fabric smooth against her skin. Her dark hair had been brushed and styled, her face no longer hidden beneath grime and exhaustion. She barely recognized herself. Beside her stood Liam, his expression unreadable, dressed in a tailored black suit that only amplified the power he carried effortlessly. The wedding was devoid of romance, just a brief exchange of vows spoken without emotion, a contract signed in ink and obligation. No flowers, no guests, no celebration. Just two people bound by secrets and a shared understanding. When the judge finally declared them husband and wife, Ava barely registered the words. It was done. A world of wealth and ice. The Carter estate was a palace. Ava had never stepped foot in a place like this before. The grand staircase spiraled like something out of a fairy tale. Golden chandeliers hung from ceilings high enough to disappear into shadows, and the scent of expensive wood and fresh roses filled the air. The staff barely acknowledged her, trained to be invisible yet ever present. But their glances, fleeting as they were, held a quiet judgment. She wasn't supposed to be here. Liam led her through the halls, his pace steady, never looking back. At last, they arrived at a grand bedroom, its massive windows overlooking the city skyline. "This is where you'll stay," he said, gesturing toward the room. Ava stepped inside, running her fingers over the silk sheets. Big enough for two. Liam's gaze was sharp. "This marriage is for show, Ava. Don't mistake it for something it's not." Ava smirked. "Relax, rich boy. I'm not exactly dying to warm your bed." For the first time since they met, Liam let out a quiet chuckle. "Good." He turned to leave but hesitated at the door. "Tomorrow, you'll have a stylist. A wardrobe will be prepared. We'll be attending a gala, and I need you to look the part." Ava raised an eyebrow. "I think I can manage putting on a dress, Liam." His expression hardened. "This world is ruthless. They will rip you apart the second they see a weakness." Ava's smirk faded. Liam Carter was preparing her for war, and she intended to win. The first night, Ava lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Somewhere in the mansion, Liam was doing the same. This was just the beginning. She didn't belong in this world, and yet she was now part of it. But what Liam didn't know was that he wasn't the only one seeking revenge. She had demons of her own, and soon she would make sure the people who had destroyed her life paid for what they had done. Because Ava Mitchell had just stepped into the lion's den, and she wasn't afraid to bite back. The unveiling of a dangerous game. Ava stood in front of the gilded mirror in her new bedroom, a stranger staring back at her. The woman in the reflection wasn't the one who had spent nights curled up on park benches, shivering from the cold, her stomach gnawing at itself from hunger. This woman was draped in a black silk gown, her dark hair cascading down her shoulders in soft waves, her makeup subtle yet striking. She looked elegant, untouchable, yet beneath the fabric and carefully curated image, she was still her, the girl who had clawed her way through life with nothing but sheer defiance. There was a knock at the door. "Come in," she called, smoothing the material of her dress. Liam entered, dressed in a sharp black suit. His presence filled the room, commanding without effort. His eyes flickered over her, a fraction of a second longer than necessary. "You clean up well," he murmured. Ava smirked, tilting her head. "And here I thought you married me for my sparkling personality." Liam's lips twitched, but his expression remained unreadable. "Are you ready?" "As I'll ever be." He extended his arm. Ava hesitated before slipping her hand through his. The warmth of his skin startled her. For all his coldness, Liam Carter wasn't ice. There was fire beneath his carefully controlled exterior, buried deep, but there. And tonight, she would watch it burn. The gala of masks. The ballroom was a world of power draped in velvet and gold. Crystal chandeliers bathed the room in a soft glow, their light reflecting off the champagne glasses and glittering jewelry of the elite. Conversations hummed through the air, the undercurrents of alliances and betrayals woven seamlessly into polite laughter and empty flattery. Ava felt the weight of the gazes before she even stepped inside. She wasn't meant to belong here. And they all knew it. Whispers followed her, carefully disguised behind champagne flutes. Who was she? Where had she come from? Why had Liam Carter, the untouchable, calculated businessman, chosen someone so unexpected? Ava lifted her chin, meeting each gaze head-on. Let them wonder. Liam guided her through the crowd with effortless grace, his touch light but firm at the small of her back. Every step they took together was a silent message. She was not just some passing amusement. She was his wife. And in this world, that meant something. Then the air shifted. Charlotte had arrived. She moved through the crowd like a queen returning to reclaim her throne, her crimson gown a deliberate contrast to Ava's black silk. She was beautiful, poised, every inch the woman who had once stood beside Liam as if she owned him. But she didn't own him anymore. Charlotte's eyes flickered to Ava, a slow, assessing look that carried a wealth of unspoken words. Ava smiled. Sweet, dangerous. And Charlotte smiled back, just as dangerous. Liam, Charlotte purred as she reached them, her voice honey-laced poison. I must say, I'm surprised. And intrigued. Her eyes flickered toward Ava. You must be the new Mrs. Carter. Ava tilted her head slightly, pretending to consider her words. And you must be the woman who underestimated him. Charlotte's smile didn't waver, but something sharp flickered in her gaze. Liam, ever composed, merely took a sip of his drink. Charlotte. She placed a hand on Henry's arm, her posture too perfectly casual. We were just discussing how unexpected this marriage was. Weren't we, Henry? Henry's smile was more of a smirk. Oh, absolutely. One day, a perfect engagement, and the next, a whirlwind romance. Quite the story. Ava's fingers twitched at her side, but she kept her expression unreadable. She had spent her life dealing with people who looked down on her. Charlotte and Henry were nothing new. Liam leaned in, his voice smooth, effortless. The best stories are the ones no one sees coming. Charlotte's eyes darkened. Is that so? Ava decided then and there that she wasn't going to let Charlotte dictate the night. She reached for Liam's hand, intertwining their fingers. The small motion sent a ripple through the watching crowd. Liam stiffened, only for a fraction of a second, but Ava felt it. Good. If they were going to do this, they were going to do this. Would you excuse us? Ava said sweetly, her smile polite but firm. My husband owes me a dance. She pulled Liam away before Charlotte could respond, leaving her standing there with a barely concealed scowl. The dance of deception. The orchestra played a slow, haunting melody as Liam led Ava onto the dance floor. Their movements were precise, practiced. They were a vision of elegance, a perfect pair in the eyes of the world. But beneath the polished facade, there was something else. Tension. A battle neither of them had fully acknowledged yet. You didn't have to do that, Liam murmured, his hand firm at her waist. Of course I did, Ava countered smoothly. She was testing me. You think I was going to let her win? A flicker of something, approval, amusement, crossed his face. "You're dangerous." Ava smirked. "I told you I wasn't going to be your puppet." He spun her effortlessly, their bodies moving as if they had been made to fit together. The crowd watched, enraptured. When they came to a stop, Liam dipped his head, his voice low. "You're playing this game too well." Ava met his gaze, unflinching. "You should have known I'd be more than you bargained for." Liam's grip tightened ever so slightly. And for the first time since they had made this deal, Ava saw something in his eyes that sent a thrill through her. Not just calculation, not just cold strategy. Something else. Something dangerous. And she realized with a start. She wasn't the only one who had underestimated the other. The war has only begun. The rest of the night passed in a blur of whispered conversations and carefully masked hostility. Charlotte wasn't done with her games. Henry wasn't as smug as he had been before. And Ava. She was just getting started. When they returned to the Carter estate, the silence between them was charged. Liam loosened his tie, his movements controlled, measured. Ava leaned against the doorway of her room, studying him. "This is going to get messy," she mused. Liam's lips quirked slightly. "It already is." She tilted her head. "Do you regret it yet?" His gaze darkened. No. Ava didn't know why, but something in that answer sent a strange heat through her chest. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about power. And neither of them were willing to lose. Lies, truths, and the thin line between. The Carter estate loomed against the night sky, its grand silhouette a symbol of power and prestige. But within its golden walls, beneath the chandeliers that bathed everything in warmth, there was an unspoken war being waged. A war of deception, revenge, and something else that neither Liam nor Ava could name yet. Ava sat in front of her vanity, brushing out the curls from the evening's gala, her mind replaying every detail. The whispers, the stares, the carefully veiled insults. Charlotte's presence had been predictable, but the tension that simmered between her and Liam, that had been something else entirely. She knew Liam was still downstairs, probably nursing a drink in his private study, staring at the fire like it held answers to questions he hadn't even asked himself yet. He was unraveling. And the most dangerous thing about men like Liam Carter was that they didn't break easily. But when they did, they shattered. And she had a feeling she was standing too close when that happened. A sharp knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. She turned to find Liam leaning against the doorframe, his tie undone, the top two buttons of his shirt open, exposing just enough of his collarbone to make her eyes linger for a second too long. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked, setting down her brush. Liam exhaled, stepping inside. "You handled yourself well tonight." Ava smirked. "That almost sounds like a compliment." He walked over to the minibar in the corner of her room, pouring himself a drink. It was a compliment. He took a slow sip, watching her over the rim of the glass. "Charlotte expected you to falter." Ava shrugged. "She doesn't know me." "She will." His voice was quiet but edged with warning. "And when she does, she'll try to break you." Ava leaned back against the chair, crossing her arms. "Let her try." Something flickered in Liam's gaze, something dark, something that might have been admiration. He set his glass down, studying her. "Why do I get the feeling you have your own reasons for being here?" Ava's heartbeat quickened. She had spent so long hiding her past, burying the truth beneath layers of survival and silence. But Liam Carter was too perceptive for his own good. "Because I do," she admitted, her voice softer than she intended. Liam didn't move, didn't press her for more. He simply waited. And that was what made her break. She turned her gaze to the window, her fingers gripping the fabric of her dress. "Your company," she said finally, her voice steady but cold, "was responsible for tearing down the only home I ever knew." The silence that followed was suffocating. Liam's entire body went still. Ava kept her eyes on the skyline. Eastbrook residences, It wasn't just a building. It was a community. Families. Lives. We lost everything. My mother, she tried to hold us together, but my father, he didn't survive it. Liam's grip on his glass tightened, the sound of ice shifting filling the space between them. I didn't know, he said after a moment, his voice quieter now. Ava let out a bitter laugh. Of course you didn't. Men like you never do. You signed the papers, approved the deals, and never looked back. Liam ran a hand through his hair, tension radiating from every muscle. I should have. Ava turned to face him fully now. And that's why I agreed to this. Not just for your revenge, Liam, but for mine. She expected anger, defensiveness. But instead, Liam just nodded, like some part of him had already known. I won't ask for your forgiveness, he said after a moment. But I will ask for something else. Ava narrowed her eyes. And what's that? Liam stepped closer, his presence all-consuming. Help me fix it. Ava hesitated. She had spent years carrying the weight of what had happened, the resentment festering inside her like an old wound that refused to heal. And now, the man responsible was standing in front of her, offering something she never thought possible. A chance to make things right. Ava's voice was steady when she finally spoke. I'll hold you to that. Liam's lips twitched, something unreadable in his gaze. I'd expect nothing less. And just like that, their war changed. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about redemption. The weight of truths. Liam didn't sleep that night. He sat in his study, staring at the papers spread across his desk. The contracts, the transactions, the signatures that had led to the demolition of Eastbrook. And there it was. Henry's name. His so-called best friend had been the one to push the project through. The one who had ignored the reports of the families being displaced. The one who had buried the real consequences beneath fabricated numbers and polished presentations. Liam clenched his jaw, his fists curling. Henry had not only betrayed him with Charlotte, he had built his empire on the ashes of people like Ava, and Liam had let him. His phone buzzed, snapping him from his thoughts. A message. Unknown number. You have no idea what you've gotten yourself into. Liam stared at the words. Then another came. Unknown number. Walk away while you still can, or you won't walk away at all. He exhaled slowly, deleting the messages before setting his phone down. The game had changed. And now it was a war. The first strike. By morning, Liam had made his decision. Ava found him in the dining room, a newspaper spread out before him. The headline caught her eye instantly. Carter Enterprises under fire for past evictions. CEO promises reform. Ava frowned, scanning the article. You actually did it. Liam sipped his coffee, his expression unreadable. I told you I would. She met his gaze, searching for any sign of deception. But there was none. For the first time, she saw a man who wasn't just playing a role. He meant this. Ava set the paper down, her fingers trailing over the edge. I don't trust you yet, she admitted. Liam smirked. Good. Ava raised a brow. Liam leaned in slightly. Because when I do earn your trust, Charlotte and Henry won't just lose. His voice was a quiet promise. They'll never recover. Ava exhaled, something in her chest tightening. She had stepped into this world as an outsider, a pawn in Liam's game. But now she was part of something bigger. And she was no one's pawn. The first move in a war of titans. The crisp morning air drifted through the Carter estate as the city outside began to awaken. Ava sat at the breakfast table, absently stirring her coffee while her mind replayed last night's conversation with Liam. The way his expression had darkened when she told him about Eastbrook. The quiet fury in his voice when he promised to fix it. She wasn't sure if she believed him yet. But the morning's headlines had made one thing clear. Liam Carter was done playing defense. Across from her, Liam sipped his own coffee, his usual unreadable expression in place. But Ava had begun to notice the cracks in his armor, the slight tension in his shoulders, the way his fingers tapped against the table in thought. He was planning something big. "So," she said finally, setting her cup down, "what happens next?" Liam glanced up. "We build." Ava raised an eyebrow. "That's vague." Liam smirked faintly. "We're launching a full redevelopment initiative. The Eastbrook project will be the first of many." He leaned back slightly, his gaze sharpening. "But we're not just fixing the past. We're going to dismantle the people who profited from it." Ava crossed her arms. "You mean Henry?" Liam's jaw tightened. "And Charlotte." Ava let out a short laugh. "Charlotte's already lost. She's grasping at straws. She's more dangerous now than ever." Liam's expression darkened. "She knows she's losing control. That makes her desperate." Ava studied him carefully. "And what about Henry?" Liam exhaled. "He doesn't know it yet, but I've already started pulling the strings. His financial records are under quiet review. His offshore accounts, his shell corporations, they're all going to crumble." Ava tapped her fingers against the table. "And what do you want from me?" Liam hesitated for just a second, so brief most people wouldn't have noticed. But Ava did. She had spent her whole life reading people, looking for shifts in posture, flickers of hesitation that betrayed the things they weren't saying. "You want me to help you, don't you?" she guessed. Liam finally nodded. "You understand people like Charlotte and Henry better than anyone. You know how people like them think. What makes them tick? What makes them panic?" Ava tilted her head. "And if I say no?" Liam smirked, but there was something softer in his gaze. "Then you keep your promise and walk away when this is over." Ava considered him for a long moment. Then she leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table. "Tell me what you need me to do." Liam's smirk widened slightly. "I thought you'd never ask." A game of power and manipulation. That afternoon, Ava found herself standing outside a high-end boutique in the heart of the city. This wasn't just a shopping trip. It was a message. Charlotte had built her reputation on being untouchable, on being the woman every socialite wanted to be. If Ava was going to shake her, she had to start by invading her world. She stepped inside, the scent of expensive perfume wrapping around her. Designer dresses lined the walls, each one worth more than Ava had made in a year before she met Liam. The sales associate hesitated when she saw Ava, her perfectly trained eyes scanning Ava's face, trying to place her. Ava smiled. She knew what the woman was thinking. She doesn't belong here. But the moment was brief. The realization came quickly as the saleswoman spotted the diamond ring on Ava's finger. Liam Carter's wife. The saleswoman's entire demeanor shifted. "Mrs. Carter," she said smoothly, "how can I assist you today?" Ava smiled, slow and deliberate. "I need a dress." "Of course. Any particular occasion?" Ava ran her fingers along a silk gown. "Something for a dinner party." She turned to the saleswoman, lowering her voice just enough to make the woman lean in slightly. "A small gathering with close friends." The woman's eyes flickered with curiosity. The news of Liam's new wife was still fresh gossip. People were dying for details. Let them wonder. She spent an hour selecting outfits, enjoying the power shift that came with it. Every glance, every whisper, it was all part of the game. And when she walked out of the store, shopping bags in hand, she knew one thing for certain. Charlotte would hear about this. And she would not be pleased. Charlotte strikes back. By evening, Ava and Liam had returned to the estate, preparing for what was to come. But before they could even sit for dinner, the butler approached Liam with a grim expression. "Sir," he said, handing over a sleek black envelope. This was just delivered. Liam took it, his eyes narrowing as he opened it. Ava stepped closer, peering over his shoulder. Inside was a single note. "You're not the only one who knows how to play this game. Let's see how you handle what comes next." No signature. None was needed. Ava exhaled. Charlotte. Liam folded the note carefully, his expression unreadable. She's moving faster than I expected, he admitted. Ava watched him closely. Do you think she's bluffing? Liam's jaw tightened. Charlotte doesn't bluff. Ava crossed her arms. Then what's her next move? Before Liam could answer, the television in the living room suddenly flickered on. The evening news. Ava frowned. Did you? Liam shook his head. And then she saw it. The screen filled with an image of a sleek news anchor sitting at her desk, her expression carefully neutral. Tonight, a shocking revelation about Carter Enterprises' latest redevelopment project. Sources have uncovered new details about the Eastbrook Initiative and how it may be nothing more than an elaborate PR stunt to cover up a decade of corporate corruption. Ava's stomach clenched. The screen shifted to old images of the Eastbrook demolitions, of broken families, of statistics that painted Liam's company as ruthless and cruel. Charlotte had gone public. She was turning the narrative against them. Ava glanced at Liam. His hands were clenched at his sides, his posture rigid. He had expected a fight. But even he hadn't expected this, and as the news anchor continued speaking, her voice cool and damning, Ava knew one thing. Charlotte had just played her first real move, and they were running out of time to stop her. When the war goes public, the Carter estate was silent. The kind of silence that pressed against the walls, waiting to be shattered. The television continued to play in the background, the news anchor's voice cold, precise, and merciless. Liam Carter's latest project, the Eastbrook Initiative, appears to be an attempt to rewrite his company's history of corporate greed. But sources suggest that the initiative was merely a calculated move to protect his empire, rather than a genuine effort to undo the damage caused by Carter Enterprises. Ava turned away from the screen, her pulse pounding. Charlotte had done it. She had taken Liam's first step toward redemption and twisted it into something else, something ugly, manipulative, damning. And the worst part, people would believe it. Liam exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. She's faster than I expected. Ava crossed her arms, watching him carefully. You knew she'd do something, just not this. Liam nodded, his jaw tightening. She's controlling the narrative. By the time we respond, the damage will already be done. Ava picked up the black envelope Charlotte had sent earlier, turning it over in her hands. You're not the only one who knows how to play this game. Charlotte wasn't trying to just hurt Liam. She was trying to bury him. Ava met his gaze. Then we don't respond. Liam frowned. What? Ava tapped the envelope against her palm. We don't play defense. We make our own move first. Liam's expression remained unreadable, but she saw the flicker of intrigue in his eyes. What are you suggesting? He asked. Ava smirked. It's time we remind Charlotte why we are the ones in control. A meeting of power and shadows. The next day, the world was still buzzing from the news. Business analysts dissected Liam's every decision, debating whether his sudden interest in philanthropy was genuine or a ploy. Investors were beginning to hesitate. And Charlotte? She was reveling in the chaos she had created. Ava sat across from Liam in his private office, a large oak desk between them. She had spent the morning gathering every piece of information she could find on Charlotte and Henry. Every deal they had ever signed, every business move they had ever made. We hit back, Ava said simply, not by responding to the accusations, but by making people forget them entirely. Liam leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled. You think it's that easy? No, Ava admitted, but I think it's possible. She slid a file across the desk. Liam opened it, his eyes scanning the contents. A smirk tugged at the corner of his lips. Where did you get this? Ava leaned forward. I have my ways. Inside the folder were documents. Proof of Charlotte and Henry's private dealings. Deals that involved insider trading, shell companies, and questionable financial movements that could destroy them if made public. Liam's smirk faded. He closed the folder and tapped his fingers against the desk. This is enough to ruin them. Ava nodded. Exactly. But if we do this, Liam warned, there's no going back. Ava tilted her head. Do you want to go back? Liam studied her for a long moment. Then he picked up his phone. Let's begin. Charlotte's worst nightmare begins. Charlotte Lawson had always been untouchable. Her influence stretched far, her connections deep. She had destroyed reputations with a single well-placed whisper, controlled narratives with a well-timed scandal. She was the queen of the social and business elite. But the moment she stepped into her office that morning, she knew something was wrong. Her assistant looked pale, clutching a tablet to her chest. "Ma'am," she stammered, "you need to see this." Charlotte snatched the tablet, scanning the screen. The headlines made her breath catch. Business empire under scrutiny. Insider trading allegations surface against Charlotte Lawson and Henry Caldwell. Her fingers tightened around the edges of the device. There were financial records, screenshots, emails leaked to the press that hinted at something deeper, something dark enough to make investors nervous. "This is a lie," she hissed. Her assistant hesitated. "The documents seem real." Charlotte clenched her jaw. Liam. This had his fingerprints all over it. She stormed into her office, pulling out her phone. Henry's name flashed on the screen as she dialed. He answered immediately. "What the hell is going on?" she snapped. Henry's voice was tight, controlled, but she could hear the panic beneath it. "They have everything, Charlotte. I don't know how, but they got the files. If this isn't stopped, we're—" "Shut up," Charlotte snapped. "We don't panic. We fix this." But even as she said the words, she knew. Liam had turned the tables. And for the first time, Charlotte felt something she never had before. Fear. The Carter estate. A silent victory. Ava poured herself a glass of wine as she leaned against the grand balcony, the city lights stretching before her like stars trapped in glass. She heard Liam approach before he spoke. Charlotte's scrambling. Ava smirked, taking the slow sip. "Good." Liam stepped beside her, his gaze locked on the city. "You enjoy that." Ava turned to him. "Didn't you?" He let out a quiet laugh, shaking his head. "I should be worried about you." Ava tilted her head. "You should be. But you're not." Liam's smirk faded slightly. His expression was unreadable, but there was something in the way he looked at her now, something different. A shift. A realization. They weren't just playing the same game anymore. They were playing it together. And that made them unstoppable. The last move in the game of power. The Carter estate had never felt so quiet. Not the peaceful kind of silence, but the kind that came before something irreversible. Ava stood by the large window in the study, watching the city skyline, its glow casting faint golden reflections against the glass. Everything she had fought for, suffered for, and lost in the past had led her here. To this moment. To this war. Behind her, Liam poured himself a drink, his movements slow, deliberate. "Charlotte's cornered," he murmured. Ava turned, arching a brow. "She's not the type to surrender." Liam smirked faintly. "No, but she's the type to self-destruct." Ava stepped closer, watching the way the firelight flickered against his sharp features. There was something different about him tonight. Less tension, more certainty. The Liam Carter she had met weeks ago had been driven by revenge. The one standing in front of her now. He was driven by something more. Purpose. And maybe, just maybe, something to lose. "We've hit her where it hurts," Ava said, leaning against the desk. "But she's going to retaliate." Liam took a slow sip of whiskey, his expression unreadable. "She already has." Ava's stomach twisted. "What do you mean?" Liam set his glass down and handed her a folder. Ava flipped it open. And the moment she saw what was inside, Her blood ran cold. It was her. Photos of Ava in the months before she met Liam, sleeping on park benches, searching through discarded newspapers for job listings, standing outside shelters with a worn-out backpack slung over her shoulder. Charlotte had dug into her past, and she had weaponized it. Ava clenched her jaw as she flipped through the next pages, an article drafted but not yet published. The woman behind the scandal. Who is Ava Mitchell? It was a carefully crafted attack piece, dripping with thinly veiled contempt. It painted her as an opportunist, a fraud, a woman who had climbed her way into Liam Carter's life through manipulation and deceit. And at the very bottom of the document was the worst part. A highlighted section with the words, "What does Ava Mitchell really want? Revenge or power?" Ava inhaled sharply, forcing herself to stay calm. Charlotte had played her final card. And it was personal. The world watches as the game reaches its end. The next morning, the news hit. Social media exploded with speculation. Who is Ava Mitchell? A Cinderella story or a calculated deception? Sources claim Ava was homeless before meeting Liam Carter, so what's her real motive? The media had latched onto the story like vultures circling a fresh corpse. Talk shows debated it. Analysts picked apart her past, her sudden rise from nothing to the wife of one of the most powerful men in the city. Some were fascinated, others disgusted. But most were waiting for her response. Ava stood in the middle of the grand living room, her fingers curling around the edges of the newspaper, her pulse hammering. Liam watched her carefully, his expression unreadable. "We have two choices," he said finally. "We can ignore it, or we can control the narrative." Ava exhaled, looking up at him. "How do we control it?" Liam's gaze darkened. "We take away the one thing Charlotte still has, her credibility." Ava smirked. "You sound like you already have a plan." "I do." He handed her his phone, an email open on the screen. An invitation. A live televised interview. Ava's stomach twisted. "You want me to go public?" Liam nodded. "We're going to face this head-on. Together." Ava hesitated. The thought of standing in front of the world, answering questions designed to break her, made something tighten in her chest. But then she thought about Charlotte. About Henry. About the way they had looked at her like she was less. She straightened her shoulders, meeting Liam's gaze. "Let's do it." The interview that changed everything. The studio lights were blinding. Ava sat next to Liam on the sleek white couch, a glass table between them, and the interviewer, a sharp-eyed woman who had built her career on getting the truth out of powerful people. The cameras were rolling. The world was watching. The interviewer smiled, her expression polite but pointed. "Mrs. Carter, there's been quite a bit of speculation about you. People want to know, who is Ava Mitchell?" Ava exhaled slowly. Then she told them. She didn't sugarcoat it. She spoke about her past, about the life she had before Liam, the struggles, the nights spent wondering if she would survive another day. And then she turned the tables. "I understand why people are asking these questions," she said, her voice steady. "Because powerful men don't marry women like me. At least, that's what people like Charlotte Lawson want you to believe." The interviewer leaned forward. "So you're saying this is a personal attack?" Ava met her gaze. "I'm saying Charlotte Lawson is a woman who cannot stand losing. And she lost. She lost her influence. She lost Liam. And now she's losing the empire she built on deception." The interviewer glanced at Liam. "Mr. Carter, you've remained silent throughout most of this scandal. Why speak now?" Liam's voice was calm, certain. "Because the truth matters. Ava is not the fraud in this story. Charlotte is." He slid a file across the table. The interviewer picked it up, flipping through it. Inside were documents, leaked messages proving Charlotte had orchestrated the smear campaign, bank statements showing her desperate financial situation, even recordings of her meetings with journalists, feeding them her version of events. The interviewer's brows lifted slightly. These are serious allegations. Liam nodded. And they're all true. Ava turned to the camera. I never wanted this war, she said. But I won't let a woman who built her legacy on lies tear me down, just because she can't stand to see someone like me win. The interview ended. And by the next morning, Charlotte Lawson was done. Her reputation, her business, her control, shattered. The end of the war. The beginning of something more. 2 days later, Charlotte fled the city. Henry tried to salvage what was left of his empire, but without her influence, it crumbled. Liam had won, and so had Ava. But as she stood on the Carter estate's balcony that night, watching the skyline, she realized something. She had come into this marriage as part of a deal, a contract. But now she wasn't so sure where the act ended and the truth began. A warm breeze swept through the balcony as Liam stepped behind her, his presence familiar now. It's over, he murmured. Ava turned to him. Is it? Liam held her gaze. For them, yes. He hesitated, his fingers brushing against hers. For us, that's up to you. Ava studied him, searching for any hint of deception. She found none. And for the first time, she let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't just about revenge anymore. Maybe, just maybe, they had built something real. She took a step closer, her voice barely above a whisper. Then let's find out. Liam smiled, and as the city lights flickered beneath them, they both knew. The game was over. But their story was just beginning.